Spirit of Christmas, Sufficient Supply, Hope for the Holiday Series, Book 3. Written by Michele Pollock Dalton. Narrated by Rick Barr. Chapter 1.
Ha! That breaks your hold on Asia, Peter crowed as the last of his father's armies were decimated. Paul Whitaker quirked an eyebrow at his son's enthusiasm for their favorite board game.
Don't get cocky, boy. You're running mighty thin in Africa now, and I still own Europe. From the kitchen, Mary yelled,
"Who wants dessert?"
and all thoughts of world domination fled. The risk board was carefully moved from the dining room table, and the Whitaker men rushed to claim their slices of pumpkin, pecan, and lemon meringue pies. "Who's going to start?" Paul asked, searching the faces of family and friends. Rolling his eyes, Peter snarked. "Pop, it's been one heck of a year. Don't you think we can skip that particular Thanksgiving tradition?" Mary laid down the last of the silverware and smacked the back of her boy's head.
"No, we can't. We still got plenty to be grateful for."
"Ma," Peter protested, tipping his head toward the wide-eyed stare of their guests. The woman and child that showed up months earlier had only begun to heal from the domestic abuse experienced in their home. So Leigh and Noel certainly didn't need to see anyone being slapped, even if it was a playful reprimand. Realization dawning, Mary swept her panicked gaze toward the duo.
"I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think."
Pale-faced, Leigh hugged her shocked daughter tightly to her side.
"We should go." "Oh, darling, Meemaw was just joshing,"
Mary softly explained to the frightened preschooler.
"I didn't hurt Peter." "It's not nice to hit people,"
Noel whimpered, fear welling in her cornflower blue eyes.
No, it's not,"
Mary agreed, crouching in front of the child's chair.
"Little miss, I'd never hurt you or Peter. He's my boy, and sometimes he needs correcting, but I'd never cause him pain."
Peter rubbed the back of his head, but kept his thoughts to himself. His mother had one heck of a knack for finding his weak spots. Sobered by the swift change in atmosphere, Paul surveyed the folks at his table. "Guess I'll be the one to start," he announced. "Been lots of changes and challenges this year, and we know things ain't getting easier. But I'm feeling thankful anyway. Got 2 new faces at my table, and there's plenty to eat. See, God's been good to me all my life, so there ain't no doubt He's going to keep doing the same. And more than anything, that's what makes me grateful." Mary nodded in agreement.
"Oh, and I'm mighty excited to have the little miss running around here each day. Been waiting years to be someone's Meemaw," she exclaimed with a smug wink at her son's discombobulated expression. Picking up on the light-hearted exchange, Noel tried to imitate Mary's wink, and everyone roared in laughter as the little face contorted with the effort. "I like the bedroom Mr. Peter and Peepaw made for me," the pixie proclaimed. The little girl fingered the ruffled hem of her peasant-style dress. "And I love my new dress, Meemaw. You sew real good." "Always wanted a little girl to make pretty things for," Mary grinned. "Peter wouldn't have looked near as cute in those ruffles, little miss." Face flaming, Peter harumphed. "Well, there's something to be thankful for after all. Ma never made me wear dresses." Mary forcibly checked the urge to cuff the exasperating man up alongside his head again. "Ain't no way to speak about your mother, young man," she corrected before a smile snuck across her face. "'Sides, you ain't got the figure for ruffles and bows." Chapter 2. The lonely drive home wore away whatever good feelings the Thanksgiving feast engendered in Peter's suddenly solitary life, and the contemporary A-frame he called home was little more than a place to sleep these days. Tucked off a mountain road, the small hollow offered just enough space for the enormous timber barn he'd refurbished as a workplace for his business. The home addition tacked onto the end of the century-old structure was built to match the original building, but inside it featured all the high-end details Stacy demanded. Thoughts of his ex-wife turned Peter's gut. Hard feelings aside, the shock he'd felt over the woman's recent suicide attempt burned him with a volcanic tide of self-reclamation.
His refusal to leave the business he'd spent a decade building was the final straw in the breakdown of their relationship. Stacy's dreams featured bright lights and big cities. Peter's lived in the rustic shadows of the mountains he'd always called home. In the end, it didn't matter, he thought, as his headlights reflected off the metal of the semi-trailer that took up every available inch of space in his driveway. A worldwide lockdown and a financial pandemic shut down all of Peter's ambitions and avenues. Morosely, Peter climbed from his truck and unlocked the trailer to check the unclaimed order. 28 custom-designed tables with their matching chairs packed the space. It had taken months to source all of the black walnut slabs he needed to create the order, then months more to finish and craft the unique blue glass inserts that joined 2 individual slabs to form each tabletop. $200,000 of hard work collecting dust. Puffing out a defeated breath, Peter roughly closed the freight container and locked it tight. Bile chased up the back of Peter's throat. He was weeks away from losing it all. His business, his home, his vehicle, everything. Promises made to creditors made a liar of him, and Peter resented every last person legislating his demise while they sat cradled in luxury. Stark reality turned the air cold, and Peter stomped into the house. His mind couldn't process any more. A chaotic jumble of what-ifs and whens sounded against his eardrums. Still, there just weren't any answers. The only money he'd made in months came from selling some of the barnwood he'd helped Leigh reclaim. Her tiny shed, turned cabin, only needed a few hundred square feet of the flooring. The leftovers sold at $25 a square foot, so the payoff was certainly worth the effort. And that's why they'd taken on another barn demolition. It offered the barest hope of survival. "Hey, Pop?" he questioned when his father answered. "We working on that homestead demolition tomorrow?" Paul Whitaker grunted. It wasn't like he had any other work, and it kept Leigh busy instead of worrying. In fact, it kept them all busy instead of wondering and wringing their hands. "Sure, I'll round Leigh up in the morning, and we'll meet you over there." "Sounds good," Peter mumbled. He liked the fragile but determined woman. She woke up every day and made an effort to secure a better life for herself and her daughter. Sometimes Peter wished he had half her spunk. Then he remembered the days when he was fired up and ready to take on the world. Yeah, that was BC, he rasped to himself as he disconnected the call. Before COVID. Inside, he marched past the bedrooms on the main floor and up the steps to the lofted great room. With the banks of windows that soared to the peak of the timbered roofline, views of the mountainside and valley below rivaled anything you could find at a luxury resort. However, it wasn't the scenic display of majestic beauty that caught Peter's eye. No, it was the avalanche of past due notices and envelopes that contained the warning of potential legal recourse that demanded his attention. Peter's parents often espoused the provision of God, but he had yet to see it. When was the magical influx of money supposed to arrive? Before or after he went bankrupt? Chapter 3. The wrecker pulled in at their job site shortly before the lunch hour, and Peter hunched into a ball of shame. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, what the flatbed trailer represented. "One of you fellows Peter Thomas Whitaker, date of birth 6/25/85? Slowly descending the ladder, Peter gave a brusque nod as he drew the tow truck operator aside. Behind him, his father and Leigh stopped work and sent concerned glances Peter's way. "I just need a few minutes to clean it out," he mumbled as he moved toward his truck. When the passenger side door opened, Peter kept his gaze averted, embarrassment choking any possibility of conversation. "Leigh's backing my truck up," his father quietly announced. "There's room in the back for your tools and stuff." "Thanks, Pop." Peter shuddered as they wedged Leigh into the back seat of his father's quad cab that evening. Surrounded by his toolboxes and the other detritus usually housed in his vehicle, the poor woman was in immediate danger of being crushed if his father took a corner too sharply. I know it's not what you're used to," Leigh softly mentioned on their way home.
But you can borrow my car if you need it. Your folks take me anywhere I want to go."
Ashamed of his predicament, Peter mullishly wagged his head.
"Nah, I can't take your car, Lay." "Oh, sure. I guess it is pretty awful, isn't it?"
she stammered in disgrace, dropping her head. Turning in his seat, Peter reached over the backrest and gently nudged the embarrassed lady's shoulder.
"It's not that. I just need to figure this out on my own."
Lay cocked her head.
"Why?"
"Why what?" Peter queried in confusion.
"You've got a family, friends. Why do you need to figure it out on your own?"
Paul gave a humorless chuckle. "Smart girl. She just don't know much about Whitaker men and their pride, hey?" Flustered, Peter elbowed his father.
"Knock it off, Pop."
Locked in a stilted silence, the return home was interminable. But as soon as she was freed from the back seat of death, Lay slipped the car key from her pocket and pressed it into Peter's hand.
"You take this, in payment for all the work you did on my cabin," Lay urged. "Elle and I wouldn't have a home without you or your family. Let us do this for you."
"Lay," Peter slowly protested.
"Please?"
she softly pleaded. In the end, Peter relented. Those teary, cerulean eyes did him in. But how in the heck was he going to haul tools, lumber, and furniture in a beat-up, baby blue sedan that had more miles than Tennessee had back roads?
"Ma, lay off," he grumbled. "All that glorious riches stuff has never worked for me, okay? If I don't break my back working for it, it just doesn't happen."
Mary twisted her hands together in her lap, even though they were itching to clobber some sense into her boy. With a hearty harumph, she reconnoitered.
"God will meet all your needs. He doesn't need your permission."
With a roll of his eyes, Peter returned his attention to the turkey noodle soup. With the last of the fresh-baked wheat bread, he sopped up the final bit of hearty broth and shoved it in his mouth.
"God's always got a better plan. You just wait and see," Mary encouraged. "Ma, stop being a doubting Thomas and eat your dinner. We got leftover pies to finish off before they go stale."
Chapter 4. Peter removed his safety glasses and plucked his cell phone from a nearby bench. Relieved to find one of his wholesalers on the line, Peter haggled over a few stray pieces of furniture he had in stock and set up a delivery date. It wasn't a big sale, but it would be sufficient to cover his most basic living expenses for the rest of the month. That, and the parts to do a tune-up on the blankety-blank blueberry bomb he was forced to drive. When he returned to the noise of his workshop, the soothing scent of freshly paned wood was a balm to his beleaguered spirit. Lay diligently cleaned up the boards they'd salvaged, and his pop ran each piece through the jointer to establish a straight edge. "Care if I borrow your truck to run into Chattanooga tomorrow morning? I've got a small delivery to make." Paul gave a hoot and a holler. "What'd your ma tell you, boy? God always makes a way." Shaking his head, Peter retorted. $1,800 isn't going to keep me from insolvency, but it might keep the heat and lights on for another month. Just remember to put God's share in the plate first, and you'll never go begging bread."
"Ugh, can't you guys just lay off? I'm not dropping close to $200 in the plate when I got bills to pay," the frustrated son growled. "When I got some extra, I'll put something into Ma's compassion fund, okay?"
Under his breath, Paul grumbled. "My son's a thief. Never thought I'd see the day."
"What?" Peter scolded. "I ain't never taken a single thing that isn't mine."
Puffing out his barrel chest, Paul braced his legs and pointed an accusing finger at his boy. "Robbing God, that's what you're doing, and there's no two ways about it. You either trust God to provide, or you don't." Fury raced over Peter's features.
"I let you and Ma live your life, your way. I'd appreciate the same consideration. I give to charity when I got something extra, so don't go calling me a thief."
Flummoxed by the conversation and new to an existence based on faith, Leigh struggled to reconcile the kind-hearted older man she knew with the frustrated fellow shouting and waving his arms.
"That isn't fair, Mr. Whitaker. Peter did a lot of good when he helped me turn the yard barn into a home. That's got to count for something."
Riled, but mindful of Leigh's violent past, Paul struggled to contain his exasperation. "Yeah, he done good," the irked father admitted, settling slightly. "But Peter can't be asking the Almighty to bless him if he's not going to return God's share to the storehouse."
"Fine,"
Peter shouted, pulling the wallet from his hip pocket. With shaking hands, he counted out all but the last few dollars of his cash. Slapping it down in front of Leigh, he demanded, "Go buy winter coats for you and Elle. I don't want to see you back in this shop drowning in one of Pop's hand-me-downs again." Leigh spluttered and shoved the money back at Peter with a horrified look marring her delicate features.
I can't take your money," she stuttered. "I'll have enough to get Elle a coat when my unemployment check comes next week."
Peter slapped the key to the blueberry bomb down next to the pile of wrinkled cash.
"Pick one, Leigh. You either take the money or I'm giving the car back."
The woman's stricken look poked at Peter's conscience. Gentling his tone, Peter sighed.
"You can't keep running around in Pop's worn-out flannel. Loose clothes aren't safe around machinery like this. Take the money and buy what you and Elle need." But what will you do?" she softly protested. "I'll be waiting on Ed McMahon to show up with one of those big cardboard checks," Peter tried to tease, the unease in his gut coming to a rapid boil. Leigh carefully jogged the money into a neat stack and then tucked it into the pocket of her second-hand jeans. "I won't spend much. I promise." Chapter 5. "God promises that he'll give as generously as you do,"
Mary explained as they poked through racks of second-hand clothing.
"It's all about attitude."
Leigh pulled a few suitable things from the hangers and checked the prices.
"What color tags are half off today?"
"Green," Mary chirped with a smile creasing her face.
"Just like the color of the money you're saving."
The woman giggled like schoolgirls and continued their crusade. "What's got you guys so worked up?" Peter questioned when he pulled up outside the store a while later. The trio of females jabbered a mile a minute, and Noelle spun in a circle.
"Looky, Mr. Peter, I got a fluffer jacket."
"Who is that?" he teased. "I can't tell behind all that furry stuff." The hot pink coat with the faux white fur around the hood was likely a decade old, if the Dora the Explorer emblem was any indication. But the preschooler seemed happy with the selection. $180 doesn't buy much if you only manage to fill 3 bags, Peter observed as his mother and Leigh crawled into the truck.
"We got what we needed,"
Leigh shyly answered and handed over a modest stack of money.
"Thank you for your help. Again."
Baffled by the wad of cash Leigh returned, Peter grimaced. "Did you spend anything? Pop won't let up until he knows I handed over the full 10%. Leigh's eyes twinkled with merriment.
"Oh, don't worry about that. You're covered. I have the gift you gave right here," she said, patting her small pocketbook. "That's my, what did you call it, Mary?" "Tithe." "Yeah, my tithe. I'm giving back to God, too. He thought you could use some gas and grocery money," Leigh happily explained with panache.
Peter fought the laughter that bubbled up until he couldn't contain it.
"Stinker,"
he teased. "Caught Pop out at his own game, huh?"
"Oh, no," Leigh tittered. "I wouldn't dare. But your mother, on the other hand."
Cracking up, Peter howled with merriment.
"You're one of a kind, Ma."
"And don't you forget it," Mary primly reminded, a smile stretching her cheeks wide.
"Now, that's enough dilly-dallying around if your business is all finished. You kids got work to get done today, and your pop is going to want his truck back."
Lively chatter surrounded him on the drive back to Hope Springs, and for a moment, Peter felt a sliver of peace. The $1,800 check in his pocket wouldn't cover nearly enough, but it was a small buffer between him and the poorhouse.
"Whoever believes in him will not be disappointed. That's a promise," Mary softly encouraged as she patted Peter's hand. "That's not good advice, boy. That's the good news. Can you remember that?" "I'm trying, Ma, but things aren't getting better. They're just getting worse."
Heaving out a sigh, Mary sent up a silent prayer for guidance.
"You likely don't want to hear this, but I gotta say it. When God can't get your attention any other way, He's gonna hit you in the wallet. And if you follow His direction, you'll end up with more than you ever expected. But if you don't, things won't be changing anytime soon. That's just the way of it."
Jaw going tight, Peter kept his eyes straight ahead. Anger fueled his frustration with the situation that dogged his every step. Just when he thought he was getting ahead, the world went sideways. Wholesale clients disappeared, suppliers failed to deliver orders that were paid for, and the biggest contract of his professional life ended up collecting dust instead of a paycheck.
"Don't want to think about it,"
he tightly retorted as his mother continued her spiel.
"Don't want to talk about it either. Nothing's going to change anytime soon, and I just got to deal with that, Ma. So let it be."
Chapter 6. Peter dropped the certified letter on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it was a coiled snake prepared to strike. As he glared at the ominous piece of mail, his phone started to ring.
"It must be 8 o'clock, he growled.
Bill collectors hounded him for a full 14 hours every day, phone calls often coming in back to back from the same agency in an attempt to reach him. But what was the use in answering? There was nothing to offer them. When the phone finally quit the barrage of harassment, Peter pulled up his missed calls and savagely deleted each one with a feeling of satisfaction. Peter paused, thumb hovering over the button that would send the last of the unwelcome interruptions into cyber exile. The number wasn't one he recognized, which prompted him to do a reverse search. On a whim, he hit the call button and waited with a healthy sense of skepticism.
"I refuse to get my hopes up,"
he muttered to the kitchen cabinets he'd built for Stacy. The glossy dark wood blended with the house's rustic feel, but polished chrome details added the luxurious flair his ex-wife favored. After his call was fielded through a labyrinth of gatekeepers, Peter finally located his contact. "Whitaker's Woods," he explained to the executive on the other end of the line. "Returning your call." As he disconnected 10 minutes later, Peter struggled to temper a sense of relief with practicality. There was a hint of light at the end of the tunnel. "Hey, Pop," he shouted as he entered the workshop a half hour later. "You up for a trip to Atlanta tomorrow?" Paul looked up from his work. The last of the reclaimed wood was ready for the planer, and the older man was eager for a diversion. "What's up?" With a lopsided grin, Peter announced, "Sold 4 of the custom table sets, and I'll need help with the delivery." A hoot and a cheer proclaimed Paul's answer. "What did I tell you? God's the one who gives you the ability to produce wealth." Peter rolled his eyes. "Don't get carried away, Pop. I'm barely making back what I've got in the materials," he sighed. "But it might be enough to keep the house out of foreclosure." A scowl blossomed on Paul's weathered face. "I didn't realize things were that bad," he sighed. "Now do you understand why I've got to keep my nose to the grindstone? It's not that I don't want to give. I just don't have anything to spare," Peter flatly stated. Paul slowly shook his head and quietly answered, "Giving to God isn't a debt you owe, boy. It's a seed you sow. When you ain't got enough to go around, then plant what you got, and let God multiply it." "Pop, that makes no sense. I've got people hounding me day and night. There's 30, sometimes 40 missed calls a day, all of them creditors looking for payments. I can't be putting money in the plate right now." Shoulders drooping, Paul relented. "It's never been about the money," he solemnly said. "It's all about trust, and when you refuse to believe that God's going to take care of you, well, The Bible makes it mighty clear. You're under a curse, and I can't make it any plainer than that." Frustrated, Peter turned away. He loved his parents, but their dependence on religious tenets confused him. They were both practical people, right down to the soles of their feet. Other folks called them salt of the earth. So why did they encourage him to throw away hard-earned money when he had other obligations? "I'm going to head into Chattanooga and see if I can find a rental truck to haul that inventory," Peter mumbled. "You still be here when I get back? I'll need some help loading the tables." With a nod, Paul gave his answer, then held up a hand. "Hey there, just answer me one question before you go." Paul waited for his son to pause and turn. "How much you making on this deal?" "Each set is worth about $6,500, but I'm taking a loss of $8,000 just to get him out of here." "Give me a number, boy. What's it going to say on that check you pick up tomorrow?" Paul prompted. $18,000. Why? Chapter 7. He didn't mean to gloat, but when Paul winked at his son, there was a twinkle in the hazel eyes. "What did I tell you?" he observed with a pleased grin. "Seed time and harvest." Peter knew he'd regret it, but he asked anyway. "What brand of crazy are you selling now?" Paul crooked his finger and beckoned his son closer. "You got a calculator?" "Pop, I've got to get into town and find a truck for the delivery." All right. Stop your fussing. Just tell me this. How much did you give Lay the other day?" Paul asked, his proud stance declaring that he already knew the answer. $180. Peter grumbled, still ticked off by his pop's accusations. He wasn't a thief. "And?" Paul prompted, waiting for his son to see the correlation. "And what?" Huffing out a breath, Paul pointed a finger at his temple. "Think, boy. Do the math. You gave $180. What'd you get back?" Resigned to the discussion, Peter plopped down on a workbench and glumly answered. $75. That drew Paul up short. "Huh?" he quizzically mumbled. "Lay gave me $75, called it her tithe, for gas and groceries. Probably took every last penny she had," Peter growled. "You know how stupid I feel for taking help from that poor woman?" Wait. What?" Exasperated, Peter stood and put a hand on his father's shoulder. "Pop, can you just get to the point? I need to get into town and find a rental truck." 100. 100 times over," Paul clamored. "That's what I'm saying. You gave a little, and God gave you back more than you expected. That's the way He works." Seed, he grumbled as he lumbered along the interstate in the moving truck the next morning. That's what Peter's father called the money he'd given the little family for winter clothes. "God loves a cheerful giver," Mary's voice chirped somewhere from inside his subconscious. "Listen," Peter mumbled to the empty air. "I got nothing against you, but I sure don't see how you're going to do anything to help me out of the mess I'm in. No offense intended." When lightning didn't strike him down on the spot, Peter continued his monologue. "I've worked for years building up a business, only to have it fall apart. Where were you when that happened?" Peter thunked the steering wheel and jumped when he inadvertently sounded the horn. Mumbling hotly under his breath, Peter exclaimed, "Everything I squirreled away for retirement is gone, and my savings account ran off with Stacy. So tell me, exactly what are you going to do about it?" Absent a booming voice thundering down from heaven, Peter gave a terse nod. "Thought so," he complained. "Pop might mean well, but this ain't something God's going to work out for me." As they waited for their table, Peter reached out a hand. "Thanks for your help today, Pop. I know you hate driving in the city."
I'm sorry for the wait, sir. We have a men's group meeting in the back, so there isn't much space. The hostess apologized as she led them to a table crowded on both sides by a boisterous group. The young lady handed over the paper menus and disappeared. Around them, the men grew rowdy and began to clap as one of the men stated, "There's a reason God won't let you finish what you start. It's because He's got a better plan." In agreement with the statement, Paul grinned and nodded at his son. Sometimes it defies all common sense, but there ain't nothing truer. When you've done all you can and things still ain't coming together, it's just because God's got a better idea. Refusing to reply, Peter buried his nose in the simple menu. Restrictions touched aspects of every business, and the small family-owned restaurant near the interstate was no exception. A dozen selections offered the basics: burgers, breakfasts, and dinner classics. As the Christian business leader's luncheon ended, Paul waved over the speaker and shook the fellow's hand. "Couldn't help but eavesdrop," he teased good-naturedly. Bruce Myers offered a sheepish smile. "When I get going, I tend to forget folks ain't hard of hearing," the robust man acknowledged. "But sometimes you just gotta shout when things start falling into place." Chapter 8. Flipping the cover to his checkbook closed, Peter groaned. Even with the small influx of cash, there wasn't much in the way of relief. He was only buying a small window of time before the wolf would be at the door again. And, as he looked around the extravagant great room, Peter wondered why he'd extended himself so far. Oh, part of it was the assurance of a good income from Stacy's job while they were married. And the rest? Well, there was no explanation for things like the 70-inch television he rarely watched. It was merely a centerpiece on the feature wall Stacy created across from the leather sofa. Peter couldn't deny Stacy's incredible taste. The house? It was a showpiece, but at the moment, he wondered why they'd considered it necessary. No one ever made the trip up the mountain to visit, and they'd seldom been home to enjoy the luxury accoutrements. If it weren't for his workshop, Peter would sell the property. As that thought settled in, Peter scratched his head. What's worse, selling now or waiting for the bank to take it? He muttered to himself. And that quick, the answer settled him. Lifting the phone from the charger, Peter dialed his father's number and, without preface, asked, "Mind sharing your shop?" "You sure about this?" Paul asked for the third time as they rearranged the pole building he used for constructing yard barns. The simple structure was large enough for Peter's needs. Sure, it lacked the character of the restored century-old log barn with its fieldstone foundation, but it would serve his business, or lack thereof, very well. "If you don't mind sharing the space, it'll cut down on both of our expenses," Peter commented. Leigh bit her bottom lip. It wasn't her place to say anything, but the thought wouldn't rest. "There's that big shed next to mine," she whispered. "What's that, girl?" Paul huffed as he helped wrangle the lathe into position. Hands clasped near her waist, Leigh mumbled her suggestion one more time. "Maybe we could fix it up, like you did with mine." Surprisingly, Peter didn't hate the idea. With some concentrated effort, the unit could be converted into a tiny cabin. Since they'd already figured out all the snags with Leigh's renovation, it should only take a few weeks. "If my house doesn't sell, I'm without a place to live, so I guess that makes more sense than handing a bundle of cash over to the mortgage company." Paul snorted in disagreement. "Your ma will turn the sewing room back over to you if it comes to that," he grumbled. Giggling, Leigh eyed the disgruntled man. "Sorry," she tittered when Peter shot her a look. "I just can't see you surrounded by yellow gingham and white ruffles." "Oh, and that white canopy bed?" Leigh struggled to keep a straight face. When she failed and burst into merry fits of laughter, the Whitaker men rolled their eyes. "Just remember, I'm going to be living next door in a couple weeks, crazy woman." Leigh gasped, a facetious look of horrified dismay on her rosy face. "There goes the neighborhood,"
she quipped with mock seriousness. Paul quirked a brow at the pair and slowly shook his head at their antics. Kids, he mumbled under his breath before he wandered away. Thanks for the idea, Lay. Finding a rental in a place like Hope Springs isn't easy. And I don't need much, Peter quietly acknowledged. Besides, I won't be spending much time anywhere but in this shop. I've got to try to keep the few wholesale contracts I have from going dry. Chapter 9. Cursing a blue streak, Peter threw down the busted hammer and shouted in consternation as broken glass went airborne. In the week prior, nearly every tool or piece of machinery he touched broke down or ended up as a purveyor of destruction. Case in point, the shattered stem of his favorite hammer and the missing head, which presumably flew through the recently added window in the loft area. "Tarnation, boy! What's all that racket up there?" Paul called from the main floor. "Just another darned expense," Peter railed. "And I don't want to hear a single 'I told you so,' Pop." The older man bit his tongue. Despite the undeniable evidence of his son's distrust of the Almighty, there was little more Paul could do to convince his stubborn progeny. A lack of provision always follows a lack of faith, he'd heard a preacher say once, and the fallout in Peter's life during the previous months certainly seemed to confirm the sentiment. "Not a word," Peter thundered as he rounded the bend of the steep staircase that led to the loft. "Just add another $20 to the tally you're keeping." And what about the window? How much you want me to write down for that expense?" Paul prompted, his glee appropriately subdued. "You know how much that dang window cost, not just in time and money, but frustration, too." "True. Guess I'll just round up that last dollar," Paul explained as he recalculated his record. "Looks to be inching toward the $4,000 mark." "I don't care," Peter snarled, his temper making a rare appearance. "Stop preaching at me." "Not saying a word," the earnest father reminded. "Just keeping a very factual account of what your self-sufficiency is costing you." Peter roared in frustration. "Fine. What do I owe this spiteful god of yours?" A deep flush spread like a rash over Paul's face. "Judas Priest, what's wrong with your head? You sure can't be the boy your ma and I raised," Paul hollered before he slammed out of the half-finished living area. Sinking to one of the steps, Peter crumpled in on himself. The ache that built behind his eyeballs and the tightness in his jaw made him feel like he was half a second from a stroke. And that's where Noelle found him.
"Want a Christmas cookie, Mr. Peter? I helped Meemaw make them."
The little girl squealed in excitement as the plate of goodies bobbled in her hands. "Not now, little miss," Peter sighed, his head throbbing and his spirit at low ebb. Deflating, Noelle scuffed a foot through the sawdust. "Oh," she forlornly whispered. Horse feathers, he thought. Next, he'd be kicking puppies and swiping kids' lollipops. "Let's see what you got there," Peter compromised, his shoulders drooping. The preschooler brightened.
"I made you a special gingerbread man, Mr. Peter. See? I even gave him red buttons, just like your shirt."
Little heart-shaped candies meandered a crooked path down the cookie's torso, and two of the ugly brown sprinkles that reminded Peter of mouse turds represented his dark eyes. Neon blue sugar sprinkles covered the legs, an effort he assumed was meant to resemble his faded blue jeans. All in all, it was the most reprehensible Christmas cookie he'd ever encountered, but the bright cerulean eyes that gazed at him were full of joy, and something he could only assume was adoration. "I'm going to save this for later. It's too pretty to eat," Peter praised, only choking slightly over the fib.
"That's what Mama said, too,"
Noelle chirped before she pulled one of the sprits from the plate.
"These are my favorite,"
she announced through a mouthful of half-chewed green goo. "Easy on those, you little sugar monster, or your mama will send us both to bed without dinner." Noelle squealed in delight.
"Like a slumber party? I'll let you sleep with Dolly."
"What the what?" Peter stammered. "No, no slumber parties.
Just, we'll be in trouble with your mom." Good grief. Somebody save me. He silently gulped. Chapter 10. "Bull twinkles," Paul exclaimed. "That stubborn boy takes after your side of the family, Mary Bell. Ain't never seen the likes of it in my life. Got a complete tally right here of all his extra expenses this week. The darn fool just wouldn't admit he would have been far better off trusting the Almighty and putting that $1,800 to work in God's stead." Mary couldn't disagree with her husband's thought process, but her vision fixed on the dark clouds overtaking the horizon. "Looks like we got snow coming down the mountain. I better round up the little miss while her mama finishes up the laundry." Swinging a jacket around her shoulders, Mary headed toward the small lot where her husband displayed the yard barns he had for sale. As fat drops of cold rain began to fall, Mary's trepidation increased. "Some storms bring clearer skies, and others bring more unstable weather," she ruminated. Unease stole over her, since the same could be said for life. "Protect my boy, dear father. He's lost right now, but I'm asking you to lead him gently home." Wrestling a sheet of plywood over the broken window, Peter caught his mother's approach. "Who you mumbling at, Ma?" he asked from his perch atop the ladder. "What the toot you doing up there?" Mary scolded, slipping and sliding when her house shoes hit the wet gravel. As she reached out to steady the ladder, a jagged bolt of light cracked across the sky. "Come down here right this second," she demanded, as thunder pealed and shook the small building. And in the next instant, the world went dark. Ashen-faced, Peter watched as Tess Alexander braced his unconscious mother's neck. Laid flat out on the sharp-edged gravel, Peter groaned as Mary's inert form was strapped to a backboard. "How you holding up, Pete?" the lady paramedic questioned. "That painkiller should take off the edge until we can get you into the hospital." "Ma's gonna be okay?" he hoarsely questioned, the bitter chill in his bones translating to his vocal cords. Tess refused to reply. Some answers weren't hers to give. "As soon as we get your fractures stabilized, we'll be ready to load up." Sharp pellets of icy sleet stabbed Peter's body like fiery remorse impaled his troubled thoughts. Earlier, when the ladder started to slip, Peter lost his grip on the piece of plywood. The repulsive thunk of wood against his mother's skull still resounded in his ears. A replay of those few seconds when he and the ladder swayed, then pitched and toppled onto Mary's prone form, haunted his stupefied recollections. As the ambulance crew loaded him into the back of the vehicle, Peter caught his father's traumatized gaze. "I'm sorry, Pop. So sorry," he rumbled, tears clogging his throat. Stark lines of grief etched Paul's face into a mask of disbelief. "Be praying, boy. If you won't do it for yourself, at least do it for your ma." Panic and fear strangled Peter's answer, and he remained mute for the 20-minute ambulance ride. Contrition overwhelmed Peter's chaotic mind until all that remained were soul-deep spasms of sorrow. A haze overtook his mind as the lights in the emergency room flashed past overhead, and Peter tried to hold on to consciousness. However, the powerful painkillers stole his pitiful attempts at awareness. "So sorry," he lisped. So sorry." Chapter 11. When Peter woke, the world outside his hospital room was dark, and the soft glow of the light over his bed cast shadows on the ceiling. Aware of the heaviness in his left leg, Peter wondered what the blankets concealed, but the fog of anesthesia dulled his senses. As he sank back into a medicated stupor, transient thoughts of his mother darted through his mind, and he slurred, "Let her be all right." During the dead of night, Peter was jostled awake by a nurse. "How are you feeling, Mr. Whitaker?" the young woman asked as she recorded his vital signs. "Can you rate your pain level for me?" With concentrated effort, Peter answered the questions before he queried, "Do you know how my mother's doing? We were brought in together. Mary Whitaker is her name." The rushed lady responded with a smile. "The charge nurse mentioned Mrs. Whitaker at report. She's under observation tonight, but your mom will likely be able to go home in the morning." A tidal wave of relief lifted the burden of dread from Peter's sore body. "Thank God," he whispered with genuine reverence. "You, on the other hand, are going to be with us for a few days." Frustration built behind his breastbone, and Peter groaned. "What's the damage?" With a few swipes at her tablet, the nurse brought up the specifics of his surgery. "Aside from the sprain in your wrist, it looks like you have some new hardware in that leg. Internal fixation of the fibula and tibia, so you'll be keeping toes above your nose for a while," she informed him. It was worse than he thought. There were sunny gingham and ruffles everywhere. His mother's sewing room was a little girl's delight, but the cherubic faces of a dozen porcelain dolls gave Peter the heebie-jeebies. And the canopy of the single bed, draped with white lace, stole tiny bits of his masculine pride every time he caught sight of the blessed thing. The night before, Peter hadn't paid much attention to the room. He'd been utterly exhausted by the trip home and the energy required to get his broken body into the house. Now, a sound somewhere between a groan and a growl emanated from him. "Everything okay?" Leigh questioned from the doorway. The heaped breakfast plate she carried drew Peter's attention. "Just peachy," the injured man snarked. "And you might as well take that back to the kitchen. I'm not hungry." Leigh shook her head in slow motion, her honey-colored hair swaying. "Your mother is a lot scarier than you are, and I'm not going back in there with a speck of food on this plate, especially not since she gave strict instructions about feeding you every last morsel." "Nothing tastes right," Peter grouched. "And do you know how impossible it is to eat while you're flat on your back? Everything gets stuck in my throat." Offering a soft smile, Leigh cocked her head to one side and surveyed the rumpled, whiskered fellow. Peter's sandy blonde hair tufted out from his head like dandelion fluff, and his bloodshot eyes proclaimed a profound lack of sleep. So no interest in the scrambled eggs? They should go down easy." "That's not what I smell," he disagreeably mumbled. "Ma's been making oatmeal again." "True. That's what Mary wanted me to make this morning, but Elle refuses to eat the stuff unless I doctor it up a little. So today we have banana nut oatmeal with a drizzle of honey." Guess it couldn't be any worse than Ma's version of a healthy breakfast," he grumbled, adding an exaggerated falsetto to the last phrase. "Well, I sure hope not," Leigh giggled. "Although, I should probably let you know, I don't add charred oats like Mary does. Hopefully, you don't mind too much." Chapter 12. "I hate being dependent on other people," Peter muttered to himself as he struggled to shave several mornings later. The inactivity made him loony, and the lack of productivity tipped Peter over the edge. Paul and Leigh cleaned out his workshop while he was in the hospital, and now they worked overtime to complete the basic renovations on his cabin while he was stuck in a recliner with his foot propped up. "Am I other people, Mr. Peter?" Noelle asked with a frown. "'Cause I don't hate you." Thunderstruck by the child's observation, Peter recoiled. I don't actually hate anyone," he stuttered. "It's just a way of, saying I don't like what's going on right now." The pixie nodded sagely. Maybe you should have a little talk with Jesus. That's what Meemaw Mary says I should do when I'm being Noelle stumbled over the word. "Disagreeables," she finally managed. "Disagreeable?" Peter intoned. "Yeah, I suppose I am, little miss. That happens to grown-ups sometimes." Noelle disappeared and returned with a toy teacup. She handed it to the thwarted man. The teal bit of plastic held a thimble full of water. "Oh, shoot," Peter whispered.
He'd forgotten the little girl's birthday. Fortunately, someone remembered to pass along his gift. A minute later, Noelle returned with a matching plate that contained the gingerbread man she'd decorated for Peter a week earlier.
"I didn't let Peepaw eat your cookie,"
she commented with an air of seriousness.
"Now you can drink your tea and talk with Jesus, just like Meemaw does."
Peter watched the girl scamper away with a wry grin. Talk to Jesus, indeed. He would need the good Lord's help if he attempted to gnaw down the rock-hard gingerbread.
"Hey, Ma, is there any coffee left?"
Maybe if he dunked the dubious-looking treat, there might be a little hope for it. Bracing her hand against the kitchen doorframe, Mary waited until the dizziness passed. That conk on the head left more than a dent, but Mary refused to let the fierce headache derail her. With Christmas less than 3 weeks away, there was still baking, decorating, and gift wrapping to be done.
"Course there's coffee. You ever know me to let that pot go dry?"
Chuckling, Peter sassed. Not in recent memory. When his mother returned and sloshed the cup down on the table next to him, Peter's eyes narrowed. "You okay?" Mary waved away the concern and wobbled her way back to the kitchen on jelly legs. The double vision that still plagued her on occasion made Mary's head spin, so as she went to sit, the unsteady woman misgauged her position and missed the chair by enough to land herself on the floor. His mother's yelp of surprise and the subsequent thud lent Peter energy as he struggled to his feet. Even with the crutches, his slow, thumping gait drained Peter. But when he spotted his mother sitting in a befuddled lump on the linoleum, Peter picked up the pace. "Ma, what happened?" he whispered in shock. "Elle, go down to the shop and get your mama and Peepaw." "Don't fuss," Mary sluggishly uttered. "They got things to take care of if you want out of my sewing room, boy." Carefully, the fatigued woman pulled herself onto her knees next to the chair. Balancing precariously on his crutches, Peter was helpless to do anything but watch. "Stop being stubborn. Let us help you," he gently chided. "Well, ain't that the pot calling the kettle black?" Mary objected on a sigh. But when Paul appeared and scooped her off the floor, Mary clung to her husband's arm as he led her to their bedroom. "I hate feeling like this," Mary mourned as Paul fluffed the pillows and helped her recline. "Danged hard-headed woman. Lay said she'd stay up here and take care of things while I finished the cabin. Why'd you send her down?" Paul kvetched. "Aw, corn nuts. Woman, you and that boy of ours got the same derned ornery streak." Mary cringed and laid down. Was it true? Did her self-sufficient pride mirror what she disparaged in Peter's life? As soon as she was alone, Mary wept and prayed. Had she set the wrong example for her son? And if so, how on earth would she correct it? The still, small voice inside her whispered, "Give all your worries and cares to God, for He cares about you." Chapter 13. When Paul called the family to supper 3 nights later, Peter immediately noticed the empty chair. "Where's Lay?" Mary and Paul exchanged a worried glance, but Noelle was the one to spill the beans. "Mama's cleaning. She'll be back later." Peter's brow furrowed. Cleaning what? The tireless woman already scrubbed his parents' house top to bottom in preparation for the holidays. What more was there to do? They'd gathered the night before to decorate the Christmas tree, the ceramic manger scene was displayed on his mother's sideboard, and silk poinsettia blossoms adorned every flat surface in the house. Suspicion bloomed in Peter's gaze. "Pop, where is Lay?" "Aw, peas and carrots," Paul grunted before he sheepishly admitted. "Sent her up the mountain. The realtor called while you were napping, and he's showing your place tomorrow. We spruced the shop up when we finished cleaning it out, but I had no idea what shape the house was in." "You sent a stranger into my house?" Noelle wrinkled her nose and retorted, "Mama isn't strange." "You just worry about that mac and cheese, little miss," Mary gently scolded as her worried eyes darted from one man to the other. "And you two, save this conversation for later." Circumvented yet again, Irritation flared in Peter's eyes. I'm not a kid anymore, and my brain isn't addled. I'll handle my own affairs. Criminy, boy, just settle down, Paul quietly cajoled. This ain't about your ego. It's about Lay's dignity. You expected her to accept your help when it was offered because it was the right thing to do. Well, respect her enough to do the same. The conversation died off while Peter stewed. Pop's point is valid, his mind remonstrated. Still, there were too many recent dings in his armor to take the reprimand graciously. His world continued to spin out of control, and despite Peter's best attempts to stop it, he simply couldn't arrest the momentum. Peter was waiting in the kitchen when Lay returned. Ma tucked the little miss in, and Pop's down at your cabin keeping watch. Oh, I'm sorry for taking so long. I needed to run into Hope Springs and round up some boxes, she hurriedly explained. Guess I better get home. Lay? Wait, Peter anxiously requested. I appreciate what you did today, but it's not your responsibility. Lay tucked wayward strands of honey blonde hair behind her ears and cocked her head. Sure it is, she answered. Friends take care of each other. That's not the point. It's just that I prefer to take care of things myself. Approaching the table, Lay placed a light touch on the injured man's shoulder before she sat down across from him. Me too, she softly commented. But there comes a time when you've got to choose. Are you going to drown all alone, or let someone throw you a life preserver? Fearful of antagonizing the stoic fellow, Lay carefully considered her next words before she proceeded. Do you remember the day you showed up at the shed? I didn't know who you were, and I didn't trust you in the least. There was no forgetting the panic on the battered woman's face, or the terrified gaze of the little girl that clung to her. Peter also remembered Lay's insistence on assisting him with the remodeling efforts that turned an ugly yard barn into her cozy little home, even though she couldn't tell one end of the hammer from the other. Lay's shoulders rolled in, and she melted into a crestfallen heap. Softly, she prompted. You don't trust me either. It's not that, Peter insisted. I understand. When people let you down or mistreat you, it feels like there isn't anyone to depend on, she quietly acknowledged. Still, you know how I ended up here. Homeless, broken, nearly naked. That's all my independence got me. A new day and another set of bad circumstances. Reaching out, Peter laid one finger across the back of her hand. That's not true. You're making a good life here. Lifting her head, Lay's baby blue eyes brightened. I am, with a little help from my friends, she whispered. But I'd still be frightened, alone, and homeless if it wasn't for God and you Whitakers. Chapter 14. Restless, Peter shifted until he found a slightly more comfortable spot in the small bed. His mind would not disengage enough to let him sleep, and the ache that lingered in his leg preempted the call of exhaustion. Lay's words battered his brain, and loneliness reverberated in his deepest parts. At midnight, Peter rolled into a seated position and took stock of his disquiet. On a whim, he wrapped the frilly bedspread around his shoulders and hop-stepped down the hall. Sitting bolt upright in bed, Lay laid a hand over the jackhammer beat of her heart. It's just me. Don't be scared, Peter called as he tapped on the door. But hurry the heck up. I'm turning blue out here. Swinging out of bed, Lay rushed to let the injured man inside. What in the blue blazes are you doing outside at this hour? Have you lost your mind? The surprised woman whispered as she braced the half-frozen fellow. With one arm around Peter's waist, Lay helped the late-night guest into the only chair her tiny house would hold. Bone-weary from the excruciatingly long trip to Lay's cabin, Peter sank into the oversized seat with a moan of relief. As soon as Lay propped his leg up on the ottoman, Peter tipped his head back and took several minutes to catch his breath.
I don't remember your place being so far from Ma's, he chattered.
Bewildered by the unexpected visit, Lay shifted awkwardly and fiddled with the end of her braid until her mind locked into gear. After she put the crutches aside, Lay yanked the heavy blanket from her bed.
Here, my quilt isn't as pretty as your ruffled, coat, but it is warmer, she quietly teased.
Peter snorted, then grunted.
Quite the comedian, aren't you?
Lay dropped to the floor and drew her knees toward her chest.
Hey, you want quality entertainment? Watch The Late Show.
The playful banter eased the tension that throbbed behind Peter's eyes.
You've changed, Lay, and I'm happy for you, he murmured.
It can't be easy to start over. Pensively, Lay considered her answer before she said,
No, it isn't. But when I think of the alternative...
The docile lady paused and struggled to corral her dark thoughts.
I didn't want to be a statistic or see fear in my baby's eyes every time her father approached. But it was so humiliating to admit defeat, to acknowledge that I needed help to escape David's abuse.
You made the right decision, Lay. It must have been hard, but you did it anyway, he said with admiration.
I'm proud of you.
Flushing, Lay bashfully studied her toes.
This hasn't been an easy year for anyone, but you've really taken an emotional beating, haven't you?
Yeah, and it ain't getting any better, Peter crabbed, giving his injured leg the stink eye. Lowly and slowly, Lay observed.
I waited and waited. I waited for David to change, and instead of getting better, it went from bad to worse. I felt utterly hopeless, and I couldn't imagine a day without fear. When I left Memphis, I thought things would be different, but the anxiety and depression followed me all the way to Hope Springs.
Rising to her knees, Lay knelt next to the chair so she was eye to eye with the disenchanted fellow.
The change I needed started here, she explained as she pointed to her head. Then it seeped in and landed here, Lay quietly confessed as she laid her palm over her chest. That itty-bitty kernel of faith, it's getting bigger and stronger. And I'm not afraid of the future anymore, Peter. I wake up with a spirit of hope each day. And it's a beautiful way to live.
Peter laid a hand over the earnest woman's arm.
I'm happy for you, Lay, truly, but it doesn't work that way for me. Guess I just can't get out of my own way, he gently derided.
Lay propped her chin against one fist and studied him. In the dim glow of the fireplace and Lay's perceptive gaze, Peter's reserved nature melted into a bashful blush.
I should go, he mumbled.
The modest minx shook her head and fixed Peter with a no-nonsense look.
The only place you're going is back to bed, Peter Whitaker. I'll bunk in the loft with Noelle, and you can sleep down here. But before we get settled, I have a challenge for you.
Okay.
Pick one thing, anything. I don't care what it is. You just trust God to take care of it, Lay requested.
Is this like blowing out the candles on your birthday cake or making a wish on a falling star? He teased through a yawn.
Nope. It's like, I've got a problem, and I know you can solve it, God, the tired woman revealed. Think you can do it?
Peter rolled his eyes, then offered.
I've got a semi-trailer load of furniture I need to sell. Think he can manage that kind of miracle?
A dazzling smile transformed Lay's serious mien into one of radiance.
All you have to do is ask.
Chapter 15. Tarnation, boy. What a fool thing to do, Paul chuffed as he helped his son back to the house. What in the heck couldn't wait till morning? You nosing around our Lay? Peter's head snapped up.
Good grief, Pop. Are you nuts? Do I look like I'm in any shape to go courting? Hurry up, you two, Mary called from the back porch. Peter's got a call waiting, and the oatmeal's getting cold.
With a shudder at the prospect of a gloopy, lumpy breakfast, both men picked up the pace.
Hop, step, hop, step, hop, step.
Peter silently chanted in an effort to find a rhythm. As he hung up the landline a few minutes later, Peter wondered again why he bothered with a cell phone. Reception in the mountains was unpredictable, so most folks never even bothered to try him at that number. "Hey, Pop, can you run me up the mountain later? The couple looking at my place are coming in from out of state, so the realtor wants me there while he's showing the place in case these folks have any questions." Noelle perked up, and she slid her tiny hand into Peter's as Paul said grace over their morning meal. When the simple prayer was complete, the little girl whispered, "Don't give up on God, Mr. Peter. He hasn't given up on you." The Whitaker men waited in the Blueberry Bomb as the real estate agent escorted his clients around the property, and Peter's thumb thrummed a nervous beat on his armrest. Lifting his head, Paul patiently consoled, "Easy there, boy. Your ma and I have been bending the Almighty's ear for months about your situation. A little confidence in His plan will go a long way in easing your concerns." Peter rolled his shoulders and neck to mitigate the tension that had him drawn as tight as a hunter's bow. A gesture from the realtor stopped up the air in Peter's lungs. "Keep your fingers crossed, Pop," he begged as Peter attempted to get out of the car on his own. "Stubborn as a mule, isn't he, Lord?" Paul grumbled as he hopped out and rushed around the vehicle to help his son. Stunned into silence, Peter only caught small bits of his father's running monologue on the return to Hope Springs. How? His mind questioned over and over. Looking up from the sink full of dishwater, Mary questioned, "What's the word?" when her exuberant husband and mute son entered the house. Paul energetically bounced on the balls of his feet and lightly nudged his boy. "Well, don't keep your ma waiting." Peter heaved out a pent-up breath. "I need to talk to Lay." Unflappable, Mary replied, "She's down at your cabin doing some painting," before she pinned her husband with a questioning look. "I'll send the little miss down to fetch her." "Sure, Ma, I'll just, go put my leg up," Peter mumbled as he limped his way toward the living room. Paul shook his head. "Stubborn as a darn mule, I tell you." Scraping a nail over a dried patch of paint on her t-shirt, Lay patiently waited for Peter to speak. The intensity of the man's stare unnerved the perplexed woman. "Sold every last one of those cotton-picking table sets today," Peter disagreeably rumbled. "I've been trying to offload those things for months." Startled, Lay looked up. "Isn't that good news?" Thrown off balance by the whole transaction, Peter turned his flummoxed hazel gaze toward his curious friend. "House sold," he griped. "Pop and I got 2 contracts from the new buyers, one to recondition my shop into a hunting lodge, and the second to build a half-dozen tiny cabins like yours to house their guests." More confused than ever, Lay prompted, "And that's a bad thing?" "They're going to need every linear foot of that barnwood reclaimed for the lodge and the cabins," he fumed. $25 a square foot. "Peter, I don't understand why you're angry," Lay softly sighed. "I have to design and build cabinets to match those blasted tables. And," he huffed before Peter drew in a deep breath. Then he stilled. "And this couple loves the way Stacy decorated the place. They're buying it fully furnished." Lay turned her stumped gaze toward the kitchen doorway, where Paul and Mary hovered. With a gentle shrug of her shoulders, she conveyed her puzzlement. "Told you so, Mr. Peter," Noelle gaily chirped as she sidled up to the perturbed fellow's chair. "Huh?" Peter asked, his eyes glassy with confusion. Throwing her arms out wide in joyous abandon, the little girl exclaimed, "God fixed it!" Chapter 16. When Peter sent his parents and Noelle back to the kitchen, Leigh stood to leave as well.
"Stay,"
he quietly requested. After a moment of contemplation, Peter asked, "It's a coincidence, right? All this is just a coincidence."
"I'm the wrong person to talk to,"
Leigh shyly demurred.
"Your parents, they know all about faith. I'm just, well, all I know is what Jesus means to me."
"Then tell me." Leigh deflated, then straightened her spine and squared her shoulders.
"I've never had anyone. My parents were alcoholics, and I spent a lot of my childhood bouncing in and out of foster care. When David showed up in my life, I was desperate to belong to someone. Anyone,"
the somber woman related.
"And you kind of know how that turned out."
She squirmed under Peter's scrutiny and moved away from the recliner. After plugging in the Christmas tree, Leigh clasped her arms around her waist and stared into the bright twinkle lights.
"Noelle is the only good thing in my life. Or, at least, she was. Every day I watched David destroy more of her sweet spirit, and I searched for a solution for years, yet nothing ever changed."
Turning to face the imperturbable man, Leigh approached and knelt by his chair.
"At least, nothing changed until I came to the end of my rope, and then all I ended up with was a hangman's noose."
Tenuously, Leigh took Peter's hand, then she grasped it tightly.
"When you're standing at the crossroads and your mind can't decide which way to go, when your own strength isn't enough to carry you forward, but you can't stay where you are, it seems like those are the places God chooses to meet us. At least, that's how it worked for me. I had to come to the end of myself before I could ever consider trusting God."
Peter shook his head.
"I have to figure things out for myself, Leigh." "No, you don't," she quietly admonished. "But more importantly, Peter, you can't. You've tried and failed. You've come up against more than you can handle. And all of this, it's either going to break you or you are going to break through with God's help. Those are the only two choices."
Releasing Peter's hand, Leigh sat back on her haunches and considered the depressed man.
"God accepted your challenge, Peter, and he blasted your expectations out of the water with his response. You thought you asked for the impossible, didn't you?" Leigh chuckled. "You never expected an answer. But the rest of us? We've been praying for you, for your situation, and God didn't disappoint."
"It's not that easy," Peter protested. Glibly, Leigh answered.
"Of course it is. Step 1, trust God. That's all there is to it. There is no step 2.
"Leigh, I know you mean well," the confused man grumbled.
"Stop being a doubting Thomas,"
Mary hollered from the kitchen. Peter harumphed.
"Stop eavesdropping, Ma," he retorted. "Am I doing this right, Mary?" Leigh called over top of him.
"Doing just fine, darling." In relief, Leigh blew out a cleansing breath.
"What happened today isn't a coincidence. When you don't understand, but still choose to believe, that's when it finally comes together," she comforted. "Put simply, faith is made for moments like these."
The conversation with Leigh haunted him as Peter worked through the business aspects of his morning meeting. All he ever wanted to do was use his talent to create a solid, financially secure future. Beyond that, what was there? More, Peter's hopeful mind answered. A firm belief that there is something bigger at work, even when I can't see it. Looking over the columns of projected income and expenses for the new project, Peter struggled with the idea that he was face to face with a miracle. But there it was, all laid out in black and white.
"Are you real?" he whispered to the universe. "Do you really care about dollars and cents?"
"My grace is always sufficient to supply every need." A soft voice seemed to whisper, "Just believe." Afterward. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, "seeing is believing," but let me flip that idea around and challenge you with the opposite. Believing is seeing. When you step out in faith and trust that God can and will provide for every need, you unleash the power of heaven on your behalf. Self-sufficiency steals your blessings. It demands that you worry about and stress over every possibility until there are more questions than answers. And, in the aftermath of those fears, it seems impossible to take the smallest step of faith, especially when you don't see where the road ahead leads. However, when you abandon that stubborn determination to do it all by yourself, God intervenes and brings His plans to light. Psalm 34, verse 10 says, "Those that seek the Lord lack no good thing." So your question today becomes, what good thing is your lack of trust stealing from you? If you are new to the idea of God working in your life, then please allow me the privilege of sharing a simple blueprint. The ABCs of salvation outlines the path to a new life when you trust in God's guidance and ample provision. Admit that you are lost on your own and acknowledge the need for redemption and direction. Believe that Jesus died in your place and removed the spiritual death penalty from your life. Claim the free gift of eternal life by confessing your need, and state your desire to begin a personal relationship with God. Elaborate prayers are not what God requires. He just wants to hear your heart speak to Him as a well-loved child would with their father. Give Him all your cares, ask for His forgiveness, and accept the beautiful gift of new life, eternal life, found only in Jesus. If you've chosen to accept the gift of a new beginning with Jesus, I would love to hear your story. And if there are questions that still plague your heart, please feel free to contact me via email at author@michelepollockdalton.com. That's MicheLePollockDalton. This story, in all of its digital forms, will always remain free for you to share. Links can be found on my website at michelepollockdalton.com. As a new child of God, you will want to find people who will nurture you and help you grow in your daily relationship with God. Cornerstone Church in San Antonio, Texas, has a spectacular online ministry that will be a cherished resource as you move forward with your new life. Find them at www.sacornerstone.org. Other online ministries you may want to investigate can be found at www.jdfarag.org and www.harvest.org. God bless. This has been Spirit of Christmas, Sufficient Supply. Hope for the Holidays Series, Book 3. Written by Michele Pollock Dalton. Narrated by Rick Barr. Copyright 2020 by Michele Pollock Dalton. Production copyright by Michele Pollock Dalton.